Good day. Welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. Today is a Beers and Barbell episode in person with Kurtis Tallaire, and we're going to talk about how you can make powerlifting easy. So Kurtis Tallaire was a national level competitor himself and now coaches many others at the national level. He also coached my friend Quinn, and that's how I met him. He was working with Quinn to prepare Quinn for his very first competition, and Quinn kept saying, man, his workouts just, they seem so easy. Like, I don't feel that taxed. And I knew what Kurtis was doing. He was trying to do very simple, sustainable gains, just really focusing on allowing the movement pattern to be better programmed without too much intensity. And this has worked great for me, works great for my athletes. So I knew I had to talk with him, hopefully have him on the podcast. Sure enough, when I did chat with him, right away, I was so really engrossed with his knowledge of the biomechanics of the sport. So sure enough, he said, yeah, I'll come over. We're doing it in person. And it wasn't actually supposed to be a beers and barbells, but he brought over a couple tall boys. So why not? So we cracked a couple of beers and we got into it. Now, this is a really fun conversation. We dive into all the issues around the big three. We talk about how you can improve your bench, how you can improve your squat and your deadlift, the main common mistakes that people are making. We talk about how you can really focus on the big picture to have a sustainable strength program. Now, this is a long episode, and unfortunately, I only captured about an hour and 20 minutes, and then my phone ran out of juice. But for the most part, you get most of the bare bones in there, and I'll also follow up at the end of the conclusion to tell you what else we did discuss, so you can learn a few lessons that I learned from him. You're going to learn so much as it is. This is just a wonderful podcast, really awesome conversation, and I will also have Kurtis on in the future. But without further ado, here is Kurtis Tallaire.
Well, here we go. Cheers to beers and barbells.
Perfect. Sounds good to me, buddy.
This is awesome.
Oh, didn't spill. Good.
Cheers. That worked out great. Because the first in person we had done, me and AJ and a friend Rich, and it was the whiskey and barbells as well. Because if you're in person, make it worth it, right?
Yeah.
So
I live so close anyway, so it just made sense.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't realize how close you were.
I live in St. Boniface, just across the river.
Oh,
so
awesome.
quite literally, right there. It was like a 10-minute.
I was really impressed that you were like, yeah, I'll come over. I'm like, really? I was like, okay, this works.
Is that like not a common response?
Well, I guess
like convenience to people is probably just easier for people to stay at home, maybe.
Yeah, it's a huge part for podcasts for sure. And I guess I had it in my mind because Quinn had met you at the other, or heard about you at the other gym. So in my mind, you just might have been at the West End. But
yeah,
no, it's great that you're here. So I mean, I'd love to hear more about your story because I find it just super cool. Because Quinn said that you were pretty renowned with working with so many people. So
yeah,
how'd you get into powerlifting?
I guess goes back to I never really worked out or lifted weights until grade 11. I don't know if that's like a late entry into lifting weights or if that's an early entry, but I was always doing sports growing up, like my whole life. Like the typical, your dad puts you into every sport growing up. So like soccer, baseball, football, hockey, that sort of thing. So I was pretty active with sports, I guess growing up. But I never actually physically lifted weights. My buddy, who was a year older than me at the time, grade 10 and 11, that's kind of like the age where you start getting licenses and stuff like that. So you can actually physically drive. And we didn't really have a gym growing up, in our school, even in our high school, where we were, it was kind of not the greatest. So I guess grade 11, my buddy was like, hey, let's start going to the gym. So he would pick me up, and then we went to YMCA, and quite literally day one, I think I couldn't do more than 10 push-ups, and my bench press maybe was 95 pounds. The first day we did typical chest and arms. It was probably a Monday. So that was my buddy's oh, you're kind of weak. I'm like, I guess so. My upper body's kind of not the greatest. And then the next time we went out, it was I don't know, later that week, probably Wednesday, Thursday or something. But I was 16 years old, 160 pounds, and day one I deadlifted 365, which is pretty absurd, I guess. So my buddy, we started off okay, 135, put a plate on and do that for a few reps, and 185, do that, 2 plates, the typical. My buddy's max, he's a year older than me, and he's actually physically big arms and probably 20, 30 pounds heavier than me at the time. He was actually working out for 2 years at that point, and his max as a 17-year-old was probably, I think it was 275 for a couple of reps. So I go out and I'm just doing exactly what he's doing because I have no idea what's going on. And all of a sudden I do what he does and I make it look extremely easy. He's like, well, that's weird. Like mine's only 275 and you just made that look easy. So, and then we did 315 and then I did that and we were both kind of confused and I had no idea what was good or what was bad at that time. And then we went up to like 345 and then we put 365 and then I did it. And then that was like without like straps or chalk or anything, like just, so yeah, like the same week that I started grade 11, I guess I benched 95, couldn't do 10 push-ups, but then I deadlifted like 365 and
You just had the hips.
yeah, and then we kind of like looked at like the records for powerlifting Canada at the time. This was like 2012 and like I was like 40 pounds off of like the sub-junior national record at the time. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. And then essentially right after that, I reached out and looked for a coach and the rest is history. That's pretty much like I never exercised or lifted weights to like look a certain way to feel better about myself, like no stress management, no health. I never cared about looking better, but so ever since like day one, it was like powerlifting focused essentially after that moment. So
Just because it came natural to get that power.
yeah, so I figured like, well, if I'm naturally good at this, maybe I should like look into it a bit. So
Absolutely.
that was kind of cool.
Well, that's a hell of a first couple of weeks to get and motivate you, right? So yeah, I'm natural at this. And so as you got into it, like you said, you got a coach right away, which is awesome. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I made was I didn't get a coach nearly soon enough.
Yeah.
And so you got a coach, and then did you compete for a few years?
So I started competing in 2013, and then I competed all the way through 2019. So I guess those, 7 years of competing? Yeah. So.
Awesome. How did those years go for you?
Really good, I would say. Like I went to nationals 4 times and represented Manitoba for my weight class and
awesome.
Did pretty good at the national level. Like I was always like, I wasn't the greatest powerlifter per se, but I could comfortably say at the time I was routinely like top 10 in Canada, which was kind of cool for that 4-year stint. So it was really, really cool. And also like one of the best things I enjoyed about powerlifting while I was competing was traveling across Canada. Like I've been all over Canada, like West Coast, East Coast because of lifting. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of cool to have that opportunity because like with nationals, like they'll rotate which province it's in. So, excuse me. So yeah, it was just cool in that sense that I was able to travel and explore. Like I was out in St. John's, Newfoundland in 2015 and then 2016 I think was Regina, and in 2017 I was like in Saguenay, Quebec, which is like 3 hours north of Montreal. And then I was in Calgary 2018, and then I was in Kelowna, and like all these different places. So it was just like cool to travel. So that's what I also really enjoyed about it too.
That's what I hear from a lot of the guys that box, especially when they box international too. The best part of the experience is worldwide travel, or just like you say, even national travel, which is a part of your sport. And so it's, you're there for an event, but then you're kind of forced to go explore the world, which is a really helpful thing. And then you meet people from all over, and that's something you even said right there. It's like, you're not even necessarily talking about the lifting as much as like the experience of travel is so underestimated, and sport can be a part of it. I think that's really cool. And so 7 years, and I'm curious what kind of made you want to stop it after the 7 years?
So I think the issue with me is that I use this analogy a lot, but if you started playing volleyball and that's all you did was volleyball, you play volleyball, you practice 3 days a week, you have 2 games a week, and then you're missing out on your buddies' birthdays and things like that because you have to compete on the weekends, travel for volleyball, and you never joined volleyball for fun. You joined volleyball because you were good at it. So let's say like, hey, I'm going to stop playing volleyball. Like, some people just like stop the sport that they used to play. So for me, with powerlifting, I guess the reason your question was why I kind of got out of it, competing. Yeah. So I guess for me is like, I never actually grew the love of lifting weights recreationally. And I didn't have a alternate purpose of lifting weights outside of competing in the sport of powerlifting. Yeah. So once I kind of got burnt out of competing and the sport, I just picked up a different sport. And at the time, I actually quit powerlifting for snowboarding because it was kind of hard to balance the two. I would get injured because we would go to Spring Hill. Like I would go to Spring Hill like 5 days a week, and I'm kind of like a park rat, you can say. So like all I'm doing is like tricks and jumps and rails and all that good thing. And I would get injured. I would hurt my shoulder, or I'd hurt like my lower back, and in a sense is like I would just, when I'd hurt myself or tweak something on my body with snowboarding, I could still snowboard. I could just modify. Maybe don't try the 540, just do the 360, or you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Do easier tricks, but still actually snowboard. But it's kind of hard to balance that when you're on a structured powerlifting program where you need to hit certain sets and reps and weights that week. And if you get tweaked every other week, it's kind of, now your whole momentum of building progress through your training is kind of all over the place, because I wasn't able to deadlift if I hurt myself snowboarding, or I wasn't able to bench because my shoulder was all bugged up. So I kind of just stopped lifting, and I just would spend all my time snowboarding. So it's kind of how I had transitioned out of it.
It makes so much sense. One of the hardest things about trying to excel in something is that you can't afford to excel in others. So,
for sure,
you know, when you have your sport like powerlifting, when I'm boxing, and you talk to someone, especially I know people who like lifting and boxing, I'm like, well, do you want to be a better lifter or boxer? I was like, oh, both. It's like, well, you're going to be bad at both of them because you're not trying to be really good.
Or average at best. Yeah.
Average at best at both. And you want to be really good at something. That's the strength. You have to have a weakness within, like there has to be an equilibrium. You're not Superman, right? And it's just this little discussion that I've had with many people is like, what's more important? And it's okay to have, you can have some strength gains. You can have some, especially when people want muscle gains in, as, you know, catabolic sport like boxing. It's like, I think you can get stronger doing a lot of things, you know, even a couple days a week. But when it has that impact on those things, like you mentioned, even with snowboarding, and I know this from even as simple as playing hockey, where because lifting is still really important to me, if I get a slight injury in my hand or anything like that, I'm like, oh, fuck my lift. Like right away, I'm like, oh, am I going to be able to grip tomorrow? Am I going to be able to do that? My knee hurts. It's like, I don't even care. I mean, it's beer league hockey, right? I'm not that worried about beer league hockey. So I understand how those overlap so much. But then the other issue that it sounded like you were having was the staleness of it, was like the fact that you'd done it for so many years, you're eat, sleep, and breathing it, and that's your sport, and you can't actually pursue these other things. Like I know so many people who want to pursue other things. I'd like to do this, this, and this, and you always want to pursue it so much more when you're focused on the thing.
For sure.
And then you empty that, or you get rid of that sport, you actually might not even do it that much because you have all the options in the world.
Yeah.
But it's also very common. Like, how young were you when you got into powerlifting to like compete?
Like, I guess 17.
And so they say, and this is statistical, that junior champions rarely become senior champions. Now, you were at least I think it's a good prime for a lot of athletes to develop a high level of passion in something and to hit a good peak within your body maturity, right? But very commonly, people who are, you know, youth and below 18 and they're champions, to actually maintain that level of desire for the sport is super rare.
Yeah,
it's already rare to have that skill and then to have that pursuit continue. I remember talking to a gal she was like 20. She'd already been an Olympian and she just already felt stale. I was like, oh my God, that's actually a terrifying place to be, because you're young and you should be like all full of this avenue and all this energy and excitement. And it's like, it sounded like she had already lost the love of it, which is like, you're only 20 and that was such a defining part of your life.
Yeah.
So I understand that transition away from it. And so it makes sense because there's a lot of other things you want to do in your life, right? And so do you still like find that attitude around powerlifting that you kind of like it, kind of don't like it? Do you still kind of keep up with it?
So me, like personally with like training, like it's pretty much non-existent. Like I'll kind of work out like maybe one or twice every couple of weeks just to kind of like just touch weight and just play around, but there's no real program or place. I kind of go to the gym and just kind of like look around and kind of like wander and kind of lift do some, okay, did a set of this, set of that. I'm like, that's good enough for today.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really have any objective or goals, like, personally. But, so, yeah, like, as of right now, I wouldn't even consider myself, like, an athlete anymore in regards to powerlifting. But I do know it's kind of nice, like, all those years built up. Like, I know I can still outlift the majority of people just because it's, like, you can
muscle memory.
Yeah, exactly. But like, I'm not actively trying to get any better. Maybe I kind of I do a little bit just to maybe slow down the regression, but
Right.
a little bit. But as of right now, it's not too much training personally. So,
well, like you see, you don't have the passion for it. You're still
for sure.
in good shape physically, and you have a physically active job, right?
Yes.
Right. So I think a big thing that I always tell people is that strength training is to simulate a hard physical life. If you already have a hard physical life, manual labor, I actually, when I work with someone who's like a carpenter or something like that, I'm like, once a week, man, do it once a week so you don't get hurt and so that you can balance out your body better. Treat them like an athlete, really. Because if you have an athlete that's, let's say we have hockey players that are on the ice 5-6 days a week, they do just stimulation stuff during in season. Let's not get you hurt, right? Let's strengthen muscles that can't be on the ice, that aren't strengthened on ice, maintain power the ones that are used on the ice. And other than that, just maintain it. And even when like people are, especially when like fat loss and stuff like that, a lot of people I work with, it's like, you're moving enough in the day. Movement's not even an issue. You're burning calories. And if you're going to go try to burn calories at both ends, you're going to go through strength training, it's not even actually going to help your fat loss, right? Makes your job harder.
And almost like I would say like some of the best powerlifters or like strength athletes, like their day-to-day job is pretty sedentary. Like it's like less active, so they can put more energy and focus into their actual training. Someone has a really busy like active work life, you almost need to program them accordingly. Like, okay, a little bit less volume, a little bit less intensity, because their day job is so physically grueling. Like they only have so much energy, like, for the day.
Absolutely. Do you take that into consideration when you're doing your programs, and especially because I know you help Quinn, he's a firefighter.
Yeah.
And I help someone who's on night shifts like that, and I've worked with a couple clients like that, and like we just can't make you work out too much. Like you can't handle 4 days back to back, in my opinion, because your sleep cycle is fucked up. And even if you like lifting, you're going to get diminishing returns on that like 4 hours sleep that you're having every other day. So do you kind of look at that when you look at your training volume with certain
Absolutely,
clients?
yeah. So like I have athletes, like there's people that work like shift work, whether like firefighters or police or paramedics, like those kind of like in the healthcare field. I definitely program accordingly. I would say like less volume. And I think in general, for the majority of my athletes, like I program less than I think other coaches. I strongly believe in like the less is more approach a little bit, because I feel like that way people aren't going to get injured. People are able to recover more. You can't program an excessive amount for an athlete, especially if they're busy. You definitely do need to take that into consideration. I feel like 4 times a week might not work for everybody, but it might work for like a few, right? And I think as of right now, so I have 13 athletes. One athlete trains 5 days a week. And then I would say like the majority train 4 times a week, but there's a couple that do 3 times and one that does 2. So there's kind of varying frequency based off their day-to-day life that I factor in for sure.
Right. And what people, I wish more people knew about this, is just that idea of recovery.
Yep.
I think if there's one thing I look back at when I was getting into lifting I really believed in no pain, no gain. I thought it was maximal stress and then you're going to recover, you'll adapt. And I just didn't understand that all my strength plateaus really inherently came from that. And some of the language you're using there about like, less is more has a lot of Jim Wedler essence to it. So I was curious where your influence came from with some of your programming.
So Jim Wedler, if I'm mistaken, is 5-3-1. And then there's also like strong lifts 5x5. I definitely do kind of. So initially, like my day one was working with the coach. So I never even heard about those guys like prior. So, but I guess the person that got me into lifting, like he kind of had a very, very, very 5x5 and also like just small incremental increases, like very simple like periodization scheme. So it's like quite literally, it's like add 5 pounds a week and, maybe add a rep a week, like very, very small minor changes. But gradually throughout the weeks, throughout the months, throughout the years, like those small changes compound into like a massive, snowball effect. Like you get stronger and stronger and stronger. So I definitely would say with my programming, it has a Jim Wendler kind of feel. Like it's kind of the simplistic approach, and it's it's very simple to see and kind of see the patterns that I do with my training. It's like less of, I don't like RPE personally, and I don't like having these crazy varying percentages and super complex programs. I feel like it's a little bit too much, especially when you have too much going on in a program. I feel like it's hard to know what's working and what's not working. And when you have a more simpler approach, you can see what's working a little bit better, and you can make those small incremental strength gains slowly over time.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. Small overtime is what more people need to appreciate.
Yeah.
Like that is such a hard thing for people to understand, but it's also such a valuable idea. Like when you look at that 5 pounds, if you put 5 pounds on per week,
It's 260.
so much.
260 pounds a year.
You're like, I mean, and it can't always be linear, but it can be pretty close if you're consistent in the right intensities. When you had said, this is where I'm kind of trying to understand your style, because you sound like kind of 5x5 or simple approach of just simple progression, because you're not RP, but you're not I understand not complicated percentages, but how do you look at the appropriate intensity? Do you roughly do percentages and then kind of go based on performance?
I do percentages. So ideally with an athlete, I'll program 4 weeks at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So I will work within percentage ranges of 70 to 85% usually. I really don't like the athlete lifting heavy at all until we're within 4 weeks from a competition. Mm-hmm. Outside of that, I'd rather not even play with really heavy numbers, because I feel like the risk of injury is a little bit there. And I personally think you're going to get stronger doing a set of 5 than you will get stronger doing like a set of 1.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the set of 5, you're doing 5 repetitions, and that's going to be like 5 times the amount of actual skill work with that movement. And skill, the better you are at a movement, the better you are going to be able to like perform when it's just for 1. So yeah, like, I guess to get to your question, it varies for every athlete, but I usually stick between 70 to 85% between sets like 2 to 6, rep ranges 4 to 8 usually. And then it's when you see your week 1 and you see your week 2, there's like not that much change going on. And then but there will be more change when you look at week 1 to week 4.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, it totally does. Like you mentioned, it's a small improvements, but like what I love that zone you're talking about. Now, Jim Wedler does everything based off of 3 or 4. We did 4 rep max at the hockey gym I was at, but it was 3 rep max. And if you work out that percentage, it's basically the same, because he would use your testing max, training max that was 3 rep, and he would work his way from 75 to 85 to 95%, which basically would work out into 1 rep.
Yeah, 85% for 5 equates to roughly 100% for 1, and 90% for 3 is roughly 100% for 1.
Yeah. So you're around the same. And I found those are, like you say, it's at learning, but at a high load. It's like learning a hard, intense skill. It's still a high load.
Yeah.
It's the most productive work I find is like around even 5 to 8 reps. Like if it's a heavy 8 reps. And I find, like you mentioned about like the skill. Well, the first 4 reps of like a hard 8 reps are actually going to be great for power development, because you haven't slowed down in the movement yet. And, power and force is like, that's what we want. So we want for the strength. And then I find, like you mentioned, it's just putting in a reps is super important. That's what people don't realize is like following that bar path, getting that bar path down. The skill acquisition is what people just don't even consider. I didn't consider. I remember, and I now realize it was unsolicited advice. I shouldn't give the kid, but he asked for a spot. I watched him struggle with I can't remember, it was like 2 something on bench.
Yeah.
And, barely got it. I think I might have helped him. Pretty sure I helped him a bit. And then he was just going to go do it again. And I was like, I've been there. It's like, you miss it the first time. There's no takebacks.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you don't go slam a pre-workout or do a rip of cocaine and then all of a sudden you can do it like a magic man. It's just you don't have that system dialed in today. It could be sleep. It could be you're just not capable of it. But you don't wait 5 minutes and it's better. So I told him, I was like, look, if you work on your skill, even just 10, 20 pounds lighter, you're going to get better at it. He's like, well, what kind of skill? Well, it's like, well, your right arm was 10 inches higher than your left. That's a skill of equilibrium. So start there. That's exactly how he did it. And so it took me a while to appreciate little things like that. I'm curious, what kind of advice or simple cues do you think people miss on some of the main lifts? Like, let's start with bench. Simplest one. I remember Quinn said that, you immediately put pounds on his bench just with a few simple cues. But what do you think people miss most commonly in bench?
I feel like the biggest thing with bench is, and this actually goes to all three lifts, so I'll say the same things, but bench, it's going to be your setup. It's important that you have a tight setup. Really, elevating that chest, depressing your shoulder blades, compacting using your legs, getting that, like a slight arch, like incorporating your entire body. That is probably the best thing I would say with the bench. The second thing is, it's a bit controversial, but some people try to find the best way to lift the most weight. So they might widen their grip, so it's less range of motion, but that actually might be a detriment to your bench. Like less range of motion isn't necessarily the best. Sometimes a closer grip is best. So I feel like experimenting different grips, like hypothetically a close grip bench shouldn't be stronger than like a wide grip bench, but it might be for you. And if you're using and training something that doesn't work the best for you, like you're just hurting yourself in the long run. Like there's no one all be all form. You got to kind of like play with your grips and see what works best for you regarding bench, and then making sure you have a strong setup. The setup is the most important thing. And then if I had to say, so yeah, your setup, experimenting with grip width, because just because your buddy has his pointer finger on the ring, like you might be better at pinky on the ring. That's like 3 inches more narrow of a grip. The third thing I would say is the unrack. You physically unracking the bar. You don't want to be unracking the bar like without a breath. You unracking the bar, you want to have a nice setup, breathe, unrack it strong, and not lose tension in that phase. People take for granted, like you even simply lifting the bar off. If you lift the bar off and you're shaking, you're uncomfortable and it feels so much heavier, that's not good. Like for example, some people feel dramatically better with a lift off, their body lifting them off, but when they lift off themselves, like that might like add 10 to 30 pounds to the bench, getting a lift off or not. So I feel like part of that is ensuring that you have a strong lift off, like making sure you're not losing tension when you lift the bar off the bench. So that's strong setup and experiment with grip width, I would say. Those three, I would say, were like the biggest things like for a beginner.
Yeah, I love the tightness is big, and I didn't even really know how to do it. I just started watching people, watch how my girlfriend was great, and it was great at like, she would drive her feet underneath and curve her spine so much, but her butt would still be on the bench because it's part of the rules. I didn't even know that you're supposed to have the butt on the bench until like way after. And then, it looked so tight, but I didn't realize the tightness made a difference until I had a powerlifting coach come say, hey, like you want to be tight. You want to make sure that everything's firing up. And that made a difference because you don't realize how much instability you're causing. You want to be the bench, right? You want your arms to move about the bench. And I love the grip width thing. People don't realize that everybody's different.
For sure.
It's like your best path has to do with your body, your shoulder width, and your muscular development. Some people will have better chest and triceps. And my understanding is it's more common when people have lankier arms in response to like with a narrower shoulder is that they might have better triceps to push. And actually, even though it seems like it's
exactly, yeah.
Right?
It's like, oh, I have really long arms. Like maybe I should bench press the widest grip, but like, well, maybe if you have more closer grip. Like, that's actually the big thing I find too. Like that's kind of the point I was getting at. People that say like, oh, I have really long arms, I should bench grip, like bench wide. It's like more often than not, I feel like when they bench more narrow and use more of the triceps in the lift, it actually like helps them lift more.
Right. So it's like when you think about it, especially if you have like narrower shoulders but long arms, right? And everyone, again, muscular development is going to be really important too, because if you haven't developed your chest, so your triceps for some reason were actually more naturally developed. But it just makes sense when you think about trying to go really wide and you have this smaller shoulder girdle, that's not going to be an advantage. But I love all those cues. My curiosity is, how do you create a leg drive effectively? Because I experiment with it and I still don't know it 100%, other than I try to do all the tightness that you mentioned. That just comes a ton of reps. I love the cue about unracking. It's very important. I probably need to pay attention to as well. But what I've just found worked kind of well for me is I get the descent onto the chest and like pause a bit on the chest, but I kind of allow that weight to get like kind of come into my legs.
For sure, yeah.
And then I drive the legs first, and then like I almost have that legs, squeeze the legs, squeeze the arms. Is that kind of how you expect to get a leg drive?
I feel like that's kind of what people think they should do. They kind of almost time it, like they'll bring it to their chest and then they'll like actively push their legs to start the movement, to initiate that force. So I guess we'll talk about leg drive a bit. So leg drive essentially is you applying mainly horizontal force. So you're pushing the bar from the chest more towards your head. It's less about pushing the bar, pushing your feet through the ground to make the bar go up. It's more about you applying force with your feet to push your body backwards to drive that horizontal force. Because when you look at the bench press, it's not just a up down lift. It's more of like
it's a J almost.
Exactly, right? So the leg drive kind of helps you with that initial horizontal force. And what I think people, this is a common misconception with leg drive, is people think it's more of a timing thing, where they kind of like, they'll kind of be a little bit more loose in their legs and then they'll apply horizontal force. They'll push with their feet, get that drive to bring it back. I think it's less of that. I think it's you having constant pressure with your legs. Mm-hmm. As you're going down, you're applying constant pressure with your feet, driving back. And then and you're not necessarily changing the pressure. Then as soon as it comes off the chest, because your legs are already kind of engaged, pushing back, it'll kind of blast it off. If you kind of have a more loose leg as you bring the bar to your chest and then you kind of push with your legs, you'll notice that people's like butt will come off the bench.
Right.
That's kind of the common thing that happens with like too much leg drive almost. So same thing with, said it before with less and more, is try not to blast those legs 100%. It's more like a 70 to 85% constant force on the way down, constant force with your legs. As you press, constant force back. Yeah. So I feel like that's kind of like the best way to get the most out of your leg drive.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then in terms of like, we talk about, it's with your foot stance, if you get into physics, blah, 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 but your feet, a common mistake people have with leg drive is they'll have their feet too close to their butt. What that does is their feet are not under their knees. You want your feet to almost be ahead of your knees. So when you're actually pushing with your feet, it pushes back.
Yeah.
When you're here, and let's say this is your knees and this is your head, when you're pushing with your feet, it's not, you want the weight to push it this way. So in order for that to happen, your feet need to be more ahead of your feet to push back. Okay. So sometimes people get tight, but you want to almost be a little bit, I would say have your feet directly below your knees, if not a little bit ahead. So when you're actually pushing with your feet, it pushes more back.
I see.
And then the other thing is you want to have your feet less wide and you want to have your feet more narrow. So same thing, in fact, if your feet are wide and you're pushing, you're kind of going this way with your forces. But if it's more together, they're working together to push more back.
Right.
So it's like minor things like that. So if you try to get as tight as humanly possible, you probably will bring your feet more towards your butt, but take a little bit off, put them more ahead. So that's more 70, 80% and keep that tension. And then that way your forces are actually going the right way.
I see. Yeah. Okay. I can have to try all these this week. This is good. Good tips for sure. I like the horizontal is actually a really big one that totally would have been true, because like you're right, you want to drive your hips up, and so that makes sense that you're, and the constant tension thing I think just makes sense when you think of anything. If you have any loose, like even though you want to drive things at a certain time, if you lose tension at any point in that heavy of a lift, it's not going to be good for generating any force. It's not the same, but it reminds me of like when you're in a squat and the knees might go in and out, but that doesn't mean you're letting them go in and out.
Exactly. You're
always pushing out.
exactly. It's not like all of a sudden you just drive them out aggressively at the bottom.
Yeah.
You kind of want to have that keep constant tension. Exactly.
Tension.
So
yeah. So that's some great tips there. Let's transfer into the deadlift. I think this one will be, because we can first talk conventional, and then sumo, and we'll have the debate quickly after.
Sure.
But conventional, what are some tips that people commonly miss on that one?
So conventional, I feel like some of the tips that people miss on conventional. I feel like people are trying to have too upright of a torso.
Okay.
I feel like what that does is it puts more tension into your quads and less into your hamstrings. You kind of want to be a little bit more over the bar than you might
posterior dominant.
Exactly, right? So if you're more upright, you're going to be more anterior, right? You're getting more quads involved, and you really kind of want to find that sweet spot. Like some people start their conventional a little bit hips too low and a little bit too upright of a torso, and there's less tension on their hamstrings and more in their quads. I feel like that's not the greatest starting position. I feel like it's a bit awkward to people, like contrary to beliefs, like people will always say like, oh, keep your chest up, like, and people might, chest up and torso angle are different. Mm-hmm. People might think chest up is how upright your torso is, so they'll kind of mimic that in the bottom of the conventional. They're kind of almost squatted up. Yeah. So I feel like that is the biggest thing that people are missing in regards of conventional. Is kind of like, what is the ideal starting position? I feel like kind of people miss that point.
Yeah, like you say, it's a setup, and that's again another something I learned more recently, because I was always getting this cue from my coach, and she kept saying like, you're every time you go to start, you're actually like leaning forward into it. You lean forward into it. So, and I see it on my client too, where she would raise her hips and lean forward. Well, it's like there's not good enough setup there. If you go to apply, and what I just started to learn was, and this I always see on Squat University talk about Ed Cohen, when he's like, it's like the chain links on a train. And when you hear them, like, you don't want to do that going into a bar. You actually want it tight, and that's your setup, tight, and then you want to kind of pull into it. Because if you're like kind of leaning over it and you don't realize you're leaning over into it, and then you go lift into it, and then you're going to find that kind of weak link, and then all the pressure is going to be off in the wrong places. And so what I found with my client and myself was, okay, start pulling a little bit into your position before you really fire everything, to find where that perfect kind of hip height is, hip width is in your feet. And then to be able to, now you start pushing the ground, and now you start driving. And yeah, you want to bring your chest up because we don't want to hunch in, right? You don't want to lose that posture, like you say. But I definitely see too many people, almost like you say, trying to squat into it. Yeah. And it's not like we're trying to make a heavy RDL here, but it is a deadlift, right? It is a hip hinge. And so, like, to be able to still get, I think one of the hard things though is that sweet zone. Yeah. For every individual, because, and this will kind of transfer into like the sumo, is like conventional isn't good for everyone. For sure. You know, it's like I've had some clients where I'm like, every time I see you do it, I'm like, I want to cue you on something, but I'm like, this just doesn't look right for you. I started to be like, why don't we try sumo? And they try sumo. I'm like, is that easier? And like, yeah. Yeah. And it's like, for me, and I didn't look as awkward, and I got pretty heavy on conventional, but as soon as I went to sumo, I'm like, this is just fucking easier.
Are you pulling sumo right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I go in phases.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to lose my conventional just for bragging rights, because I know the old cheating thing, and it's a different lift, you know. Yeah. But but my hip width is built like that, and there's kind of archetypes that I've understood that, you know, if you have wide shoulders and narrow hips, kind of like an upside down triangle, you're going to be great at producing force like fast off the ground horizontally, right? So not necessarily always well built for you imagine that be a great almost linebacker, or even like a running back or something like that, because you just a ton of horizontal force. And then the linemen are more the opposite. You might have kind of similar shoulder width but wider hips, and you have like the upside or the actual triangle, and that allows you to like spread out your hips and actually drive into that. And when the guy pointed that kind of, you know, basically anatomy to me, So this just makes sense, like why it felt pounds easier. And I didn't develop that skill, similar, not quite like yourself at, the first time you're lifting at 360 pounds. But when I went from going from conventional to sumo, I'm like, I don't even feel my back as much. Like, this is crazy. So when it comes to sumo, though, there is more technique in it and there is more quad in it. So what do you think people miss on the sumo end?
Something I feel with sumo that they're missing, I would say patience. You'll see a lot of people struggle with sumo that are inexperienced, where they're struggling with their lockout per se, and they're a little bit rounded, and they're kind of looks awkward. But sumo is a patience lift. It's a 5 seconds to get it off the ground, but once it's off the ground, it's locked out like that. There's a lot of people that pull sumo, they'll pull it off the ground too fast, and then they'll get out of position at the top. If you get out of position in sumo at any point, it's very, 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 very hard for you to finish that lift. With conventional, you can get out of position a little bit and still muscle it, but if you try to muscle a sumo deadlift and you're not patient with it, you're going to have yourself a very, very hard time. So I'd say the biggest issue I see with sumo pullers that are inexperienced is patience. The most important thing with sumo is you have to have patience. It might take 3 seconds for the bar to leave the ground, but when it does, you have the lift.
I see. So there's almost like you, at a high force, you're seeing more of a difficulty that they can get away with grinding that the first few seconds kind of thing.
For sure.
Really trying to get off the ground. Like, it's worth that battle a little bit more, which I think is fair. I think I just never really, if I didn't see a lot of speed coming off my bar in a conventional, there was only one time where I was getting frustrated with my technique that I ever tried to battle out bad form. But if it wasn't moving fast enough with conventional, I didn't really try to battle it. But I felt like I could safely battle a sumo. And again, just my own experience. But let's kind of like, I just want to hear your views on is sumo versus conventional. Is sumo cheating?
No.
Okay. I agree.
Yeah.
But why do you see it that way?
So I feel like people have that sense of sumo is cheating in the sense that, well, if you actually physically looked at all the records, like for the world records, Canadian records, Manitoba records, it's usually, for the most part, split down the middle, like conventional sumo. But people just seem to get upset with the sumo polos for whatever. Can we swear on this podcast?
I've been swearing a few times.
Oh, yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Okay, so I was watching my words.
No, go ahead.
So I notice if you had to put things like broadly, you'll see more girls sumo than guys. You'll see the lighter athletes do more sumo. The heavier lifters do more conventional. Now, this is the fun thing to talk about. It's barbell starting positions. So, for example, the hardest part of a sumo is off the floor, right? And if I were to do sumo, the bar might be, kind of by my ankles. But if a really, really, really shorter person, lighter athlete does sumo, the bar might be like mid-shin. Sometimes even like almost at the knees. Not maybe at the knees, but like a lot higher up.
Yeah.
So for them, autonomically, like they have a bigger advantage doing sumo, because if the hardest part of the lift is off the floor and they're already halfway there because they're so short, it makes it easier initially for them. Conventional and sumo, like, it's one of those lifts where a deadlift, for example, the deadlift, the bar doesn't scale proportionally to someone's height.
Right.
If I'm 7 feet tall, the bar is going to be at my ankles. If you have another athlete who's 5 feet tall, the bar might be at their knees.
Yeah.
So that, in a sense, that's kind of why you see more heavier lifters do more conventional, more lighter lifters do more sumo. It's because, like, barbell starting positions.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the lighter the athlete, the more mobile they are to get into a more optimal starting position. The more heavier they are, the harder it is for them to wedge themselves into a more optimal sumo position. So that's kind of what I've noticed. So I wouldn't say sumo cheating. It's just, generally speaking, if you're a light female, you're probably going to see more sumos.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a heavy male, you're probably going to see a lot of conventional.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of, and then you got all your in-betweens. So.
Well, that all makes sense. And I mean, even because Quinn's conventional on sumo, and we always debate it mildly, friendly, but we both agree. It's just the problem is it's a different lift, and you can't make it perfectly balanced, right? Like even just that whole thing is like the bar's not standardized, right? Bench press is not standardized. Like you can't standardize everything. It can't be fair. It's just like it's the sport of lifting.
And also,
a bar.
like briefly, just talking about bench press. If a lighter athlete has a wide grip bench press, so they might look like really, really wide, their hands are way outside their elbows. That's their wide grip. Now, the bar is 7 feet long, just because now you have this heavier athlete who's a 6'8", 350-pound guy. He might do max grip, but for him, it looks like a close grip for other athletes. So it's like now he's forced to do exclusively close grip because the bar doesn't scale in size for him.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those things where now he can't even do a wide grip if he wanted to because the bar doesn't go that wide.
Physically can't do it.
So that's why I say, like, in that sense, like people just take advantage of like what the limitations are a bit. Like,
well, that's sport, right?
So
that you're always trying to take advantage of limitations, and there's just limitations within the sport, and people get caught up in and I don't think too many. I think when someone does conventional, because it obviously looks like a bigger bar path, that they'll shit on the people doing the shorter bar path.
Yeah.
But then it's like, then do it.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, if it's so much cheating, why aren't you doing it? And then they'll say, oh, it was cheating. I was like, but could you lift as much? Because if you could lift more, then it kind of makes sense to try that lift.
Yeah, you'll never have a hater that's doing better than you.
Classic, yes. So. Well, so let's talk quickly about squat too, because I want to get that one in there. Actually, one more question about deadlift, because this is about deadlift. And I did want to ask you about straps or no straps, because I kind of go back and forth. And I haven't actually, prepared for competition. One of the advice I got from my last coach, he had said, like, don't really have to worry about it. Worry about the skill of the movement first. And that's the way I always looked at it. But she said, if you get closer to competition, you're going to want to start using your gripping the bar as you would for competition. So when you work with your athletes, what do you recommend they do? Like, does it make sense to have time blocks where you're like, okay, let's just concentrate on skill. Let's do straps. You'll lift heavier. The lift itself will be easier. And then as you get closer to competition, 3 to 4 months out, let's start using straps or no straps. Or do you always say, yeah, let's just do the skill as you would do it in the event?
I'm not against straps, but never once have I encouraged straps.
Okay.
So all of my athletes don't use straps, and I program grip work usually.
Yeah.
I think there's squat, there's bench, there's deadlift, and there's also missing lifts from something stupid. Something really stupid is you go for a PR deadlift on the platform, and then the bar starts slipping out of your hands and you drop it. It's like, well, congratulations, you might have just lost 30 pounds in your deadlift because you couldn't hold on to it for a few seconds. Like, I'd rather you be weaker and hold on to it versus stronger and not hold on to it. So I think if you're going to use straps, you have to supplement grip work.
Grip work, for sure.
And I've been very, very blessed. Like, I have bigger hands, and I also have skinny hands with really long fingers. So I have like good hands for grip. So I've personally never had an issue. That's probably one of my strengths is grip. I've never had a grip. Like most grip challenges I can destroy. Like at like the Red River X, like hang for 2 minutes. Like I can do that, like no issue without chalk, and I win the prize. Like, and it's like rolling and like there's like spinning, it's going up and down, whatever. Like, so grip is extremely important in the sport. For straps, I feel like you can use it, but if you use straps in your training and then you go out for your powerlifting competition and you miss a lift on grip, then you might need to rethink your training.
Absolutely. You don't want that to
So that's what I would say regarding that. But I never have any of my athletes using straps, and I usually program like farmer's walks or like dumbbell holds and like just gritty grip work. So I just like that.
So like I love the farmer walks.
Yeah.
So you're seeing heavy dumbbell, like that's what I'm trying to even think of as some new grip work too. I know there's classic just chin up hang. You can just do a chin up hang weighted and stuff like that. What are some other strategies you use for grip work?
This is honestly, I think, the best thing you can do for your grip. Grab a tennis ball and you squeeze it 50 times with your thumb, 50 times with your pointer finger, middle finger, ring, pinky, and then do 50 times all together. If you do that once a day for 2 weeks, you'll never have a grip issue ever again in your life.
Okay. I like that.
That's because I feel like with grip work, what it's missing is you'll train your entire hand as a whole, and your hand will get stronger as a whole. But I feel like with a tennis ball with grip work, if you train each finger independently of each other, that you could have a strong, like 4 of your 5 fingers could be extremely strong, but maybe your pinky's weak or maybe your ring finger's weak. So maybe that's the reason why once that let goes, the other 4 can't compensate the difference. So that's why you lose your grip.
Yeah.
It might not be an entirety hole. It might be like a missing link.
Right.
So I feel like if you do the tennis ball thing, you're able to like work up your
individualize.
Yeah, and it's easy, like using the washroom, just grab a tennis ball, maybe, I don't know, like, or like driving to work, or maybe you're in class, maybe you're a student and you're listening to a lecture while you're doing that, you're just squeezing 50 times on each finger. Takes like less than 10 minutes.
And then you see the weakness as you're doing it, because
and then you'll get to one of your fingers like, oh my god, this is pathetic. Like, it's so much easier with the thumb, or you know what I mean? Like, and you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. So that's my biggest like grip hack. Anytime I've had an athlete with grip issues, told him to do the tennis ball thing for 2 weeks and never again grip issue.
Really?
Super, super good.
Nice. Okay, well, I'm going to get a fresh tennis ball next week. I like that. And I mean, even the whole straps thing, for the most part, like the only people that I say like really even need that question is like, do you plan on competing?
Yeah. Because
then it's like, that is your sport. It's how you compete. I used to have an issue with the switch grip, and I think it was like lack of experience in and understanding it, but I also just had so many asymmetries in my body of like, oh, this hip and this hip was, I mean, it's bodies. Bodies are like that. And, you know, if you're a hockey player, you have different, you're not balancing out the hockey reps, right?
Yeah.
So I was so worried about doing that when I already had an imbalanced back. But I mean, hook grip is fucking really annoying. And once someone has kind of mentioned it, it's like, yeah, that's sport. Like, sport's going to be a little asymmetrical. Do you see any downstream negative effects of a switch grip versus a hook grip, or is it still just like, just do the left?
Overall, to answer the question, no. However, I think in particular, sumo, I feel like if you're a sumo lifter, I feel like hook grip is a little bit better than mixed grip.
That makes sense, yeah.
In the sense that with sumo, your underhand grip, so if both my arms are out inside of me, part of sumo is your hands, or your arms and your hands are rubbing against your thighs as you're lifting up, right? It might get caught in your thigh. So now if my right hand's an overhand grip, my left hand's an underhand grip, what happens is this is going to touch my thigh. If I rotate over, it brings it out. So now this meat of my arm is going to touch my thigh, whereas this, my right arm, will not, even with the same grip width, right? Like, you can visually see it. So I feel like if you're having a hook grip with sumo, it's going to be a little bit more advantageous because your arm won't make contact with your thigh as easy. When your hands are outside your legs, you'll never really have that issue.
Right.
As much. Maybe you do if there's some guys with big legs where they run into that issue, right? Also, hook grip, I feel like it's a little bit better with sumo, because I feel like with sumo, you want to kind of make your arms long. I feel like there's less upper back retraction with sumo compared to conventional. And you having a hook grip, it's going to be a little bit more neutral, and you can almost like let your arms hang a little bit more than a mixed.
Yeah.
So
I like that. And even considering, I remember what AJ had mentioned to me was, because he always did no straps.
Yeah.
And he was doing conventional.
Yeah.
And then he had said, like,
you're going to hate my grip when I tell you after this.
Okay. Well, he would do the switch grip. And then I tried to get him to use the straps, because I was using straps. And then he was like, man, I like it better without, because I feel like I pull the bar closer. And so but it makes sense that you say, like, I don't feel that when I'm doing a sumo. It literally prevents my lockout. Yeah. I don't like the lockout on a switch grip in a sumo.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason why I've been doing straps again.
That's exactly what I was getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the outside, though, you're not going to physically hit that.
Yeah.
And so you can actually, but this pull actually kind of pulls you into it, and it neutralizes the bar well. But yeah, so tell me about your grip. I want to hear that.
So I will just want to say a couple more points of what we just talked about. So, I gotta remember. Maybe I'll just save my grip first, and then I'll come back to my thought after I burp there.
This is the effect of the beer, right? Because the beer, it was funny because we did the.
It's hard. It's hard. Burping is hard to control when you're in a mic. When I'm mic'd up, I'm trying to make it more discreet. Little burps as well as a big burp. My grip, I hold the bar with my fingertips.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like if you pass me your pen, I'll show you. So I'll physically hold it like this. Like it's like that.
You don't. Your grip is so strong.
Yeah, it's only like an inch on my hand, like just my fingertips like that. So I'll hold all my weight like that.
That's I guess the long fingers. Like,
and also just my grip strength is like absurd. So
I'll
just hold it. I'll literally hold all my working sets, everything with my fingertips. So like my calluses, when I used to lift, my calluses wouldn't be on my palm, and they would actually be like on my second knuckle of my fingers.
Wow.
Like that's where my calluses would develop.
So for context, because I was going to ask this anyways, what were your numbers like? What was like your PRs or your typical working sets?
So my best lifts were 550 squat, 600 deadlift, 300 bench.
Nice.
Bench was always lagging, and that was all around.
So that's a 1,200 or no 1,500 pound club, right?
I don't know.
No, not quite, because you had the 300 bench. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't know what that equates because I'm used to.
Yeah, 1,400 or kilos is what.
Yeah. Well, and then my best competition. So that was a gym lift. It's not really. My gym lifts were my competition lifts were slightly less. It was 240 kilo squat, so that's like 530. And then a 265 dead, 585, and then a 132.5 bench, which is like 292. And that was at like 215 body weight. And that was as a junior.
As a junior?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like, I mean, just the context of having, 500 pounds and probably your training reps and your actual performance being just a hook on your fingers is incredible. Well, I'm hoping that the tennis ball trick will actually help me on that.
It definitely helps. Definitely helps. Okay, what's the point I was trying to make with the grips? We're talking about a hook grip. We're talking about sumo. I can't think. Maybe we'll come back to it once it comes to my brain.
Yeah, come back.
There was something I wanted to say. There was like two specific things.
Is it versus sumo or conventional, you think?
Wasn't that? Okay. Yeah. Straps are good if you're blasting like RDLs. If you're right, because that might be an issue where like your grip might give out, and if your actual focus is on like developing your hamstrings and that hinge, RDLs would be really, really good opportunity for you to use straps.
Yeah, it's what do you want out of the lift?
Exactly.
Right? Like if you're doing chin-ups, you want to develop your lats. It's called my grip's giving out. It's like, well, A, we're going to still need to do grip work, but B, let's blast your lats, right? Yeah. And when I was doing bodybuilding, it's like I've never strapped up for more things because when I did my prep, it's like you're low calories, you're just more exhausted, and I'm like, I just don't want to, because usually when I'm depleted, the first thing that goes is my grip. Like I go to lift up anything, and I feel like low calories hits my grip, and so I would strap up everything, and sure enough, the first thing that went was my forearms. But I was curious if you ever messed around with fat grips with clients on some accessory work, because I know that was Charles Poliquin's big thing is he made customized dumbbells that were all fat gripped automatically so that all of his athletes had massively strong grips. Have you ever played with that?
Fat grips, no. I think exclusively like with it's one of those things too, like if you see a client that's not having grip issues, you don't really need to change anything.
Totally.
But if you do see clients with grip issues, then you're kind of like, okay, so one thing we do is like after they deadlift, hold it for 5 seconds, then put it down.
Yeah.
Right. And then usually farmer's walks are a big staple. And then the other thing is like, you're just doing holds. So like you grab I don't know, for you, let's say grab 100-pound dumbbells in each hand and just stand there. So it's almost like you're doing a farmer's walk, but you're not walking. You're physically just standing there, glutes contracted, chest up, shoulders back and down, squeezing those dumbbells hard without hook grip and seeing how long you can hold on to it for. Maybe you hold on to it for 30 seconds. Next week, you're holding on to it for 40 seconds, and then trying to work your way up to like 2 minutes holding on to those things, and that just develops your thing like statically holding it.
Yeah, that's something I got from an Instagram guy I follow, and he mentioned that like that's actually the downside of always using just farmer carries that are too long duration.
Yeah.
what he was big on actually was even shorter duration than that. The challenge I was having with that was if it's teamed up on the same day as your conventional or on your deadlift, it's like you might be pre-fatigued too much. So it has to be done on an appropriate day where when you're going to do the hold, because it's going to be hitting your posterior chain to hold it up. And I like the dumbbells because it's a little bit more unstable. And I think that might have been what I was missing as I was trying to finish my deadlifts. And I would just try to do like a couple holds of like a lighter load of just like statically holding. And he was saying like do 10 to 20 seconds because that's your power interval. That's developed some power and that hard raw strength that you want. But what I like about what you're saying is like, well, the dumbbell can be even more because you can position it where it's not going to be too much in the posterior chain. But you can position it in a way that and then it's easy to kind of rack and unrack and hit those heavier loads. So
another thing you can do is you can do hex holds. So like the dumbbells with the hexagon, that's where you place your fingers and then you just hold it like that.
Yeah, we used to do plate pinches, which I wasn't a fan of. Because it's that feels awkward, that level of it, but it still works the grip good. But it's like we would just get our guys to do, we had like a couple different like rolling extension ones, and then they would team it up with that kind of pinching hold. But yeah, I mean, I think grip, it's makes everything stronger, like across the board, which is really, the fact that it affects your bench is kind of amazing to me even. It's just like it's the stability point for all control and contact.
It's also kind of cool because like I do say my strongest aspect of my lifting is my grip. Like that's kind of like I have really good accolades, but like I'll even like arm wrestle my clients who are stronger than me, and then I'm beating them because I don't know if it's a thing. Like just my grip strength has always been insanely strong. Like there's different sports where people have said like grip strength is kind of an indicator, like you're maybe like how naturally you might be able to produce force in different things, right? And my grip strength has always been good, so I have noticed that like in different things I've done. Like I did rock climbing, and that was easy to me, like because my grip, and like even like now I'm big into like disc golf, and that's like it's like throwing a frisbee, and like that's a big indicator of like potential distance and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a neat thing. But yeah, so grip strength is definitely up there.
Huge. When I work with boxers, you have to do that because that's the accentuation of the punch. It's the drive through. I remember hearing Sugar Ray Leonard always said Roberto Duran had hands of bricks. He'd never had someone hit him like that, felt like they were bricks. And he used to do manual labor. So one of my sparring partners said that me and another guy that sparred him when we were starting out, and he was like, you and Jill were always the hardest hitters, and you guys both did manual labor. And so me and him both had the theory that grip strength matters significantly for power, and it makes sense. It's the last point of contact that you want to produce force, but it's the point of contact that matters so much. It's going to translate everything else in the body. So I really love that. Great feedback on that. Now let's transition to the squat. Curious on the squat tips that you think a lot of people miss as far as trying to get, good power out of that.
I feel like it's something similar to what I said with deadlift, but I feel like with squat, it's sometimes because there's an eccentric portion of the lift, there's an isometric, well, not really an isometric, and like you're doing there's a slight thing.
There could be a pause.
There could be, right? There's eccentric, concentric. I feel like your body, in a way, knows what it wants to do to be its strongest on the concentric. I feel like sometimes people try to force and fight what their body naturally wants to do. Me as a low bar squatter, and also I feel like people's bar position is slightly off. I feel like it's a little bit too high or it's a little bit too low. You'll see people when they come out of the squat, maybe their hips rise a little bit, and then they immediately want to fight it. That might not necessarily be the case. It's like, hey, maybe just put the bar slightly lower and just understand that the angle that your body wants to come up in might be your body's strongest angle. Like in the sport of powerlifting, it doesn't necessarily be the most prettiest. You're going to have different anatomies, you're going to have different body types, all of that. People are stronger in different areas. So I feel like finding out what works best for you, and everybody's going to look different. So I feel like it's less about trying to make your form perfect, and it's more about trying to make the best of your form
Best, I like that. Yeah.
So I would say that's one. Hips are like being a little bit more forward isn't the worst thing in the squat. I would say that's my first tip. And then, like you said, with the form. The other thing is, number two is I would say where the weight is in your feet.
Mm-hmm.
People like, there's like, let's put it in categorize. So like you can feel the weight in your toes, you can feel the weight in your balls of your feet, you can feel the weight in your heels. I think you need to feel the weight in your midfoot or maybe more balls of the toes. I feel like you shouldn't feel it in your heels at all. I feel like that was a cue before. I don't know if people still cue that, but I don't think that's the best cue. I feel like if you're applying force in your heels, the weight overall is going to be a little bit more behind you, and you kind of want to be driving through center foot to get the most force. I think that's the best way to press from. And then let's say a third tip. I'm going to say a third tip.
Go for it.
Wasn't prepared. Your brace.
Oh, yeah, it's a great cue.
Your brace. Your brace is extremely important.
Feel like it's like,
how tight you get that midsection
Yeah.
before you descend is extremely important. If that's not like the best it could be, that could be pounds and pounds and pounds. Making sure you get that tight brace, breathing, pushing against that belt, or if you don't have a belt, just making that intra-abdominal brace, maintaining it through the entirety of the lift. And I would say like you're holding your breath in on the way down, and then you're maybe letting out a little bit of air halfway after your concentric phase. Maybe not letting out your air too early. That could be bad too. So yeah, I would say those three things. So allowing your body to be a little bit slightly off perfect because everybody's form is different. That's number one. Number two would be the
pushing in your feet.
Yeah, where you feel the weight in your feet, more midfoot, less heels. And then number three would be your brace.
Love all those, and those have all been the things that I've learned in the last couple of years. The one that I think this kind of fits into two in the question, number one and number two. So one is like the imperfect form is like I used to think, sagittal everything, right? It was just like, okay, are my hips neutral? And then almost a neutral this, neutral that, and perfect hip hinge, and one of the old adage of like weight in the heels. And so I wasn't doing a lot of knee translation. I didn't, even though I had larger quads, I didn't actually have a lot of quad recruitment, I felt, in my squat. It was actually a ton of posterior chain, whereas like I was getting massive back pumps that were not good. And so I started to realize like this can't be good. So this goes into the foot thing too, was like, it was more recently when I started to explore my ability to hold a really deep squat, just a deep squat hang. And I'm not sure if you saw this is on Instagram. It was basically like do 30 minutes of body weight squat holding and watch what your hips do. And I just thought it was so interesting. I've had this knee issue for a while, and so let's try it. And it didn't cure my knee issue, but it made a difference. And it made the biggest difference in just my hips, like ability to hold the bottom. What was interesting to me was like, wait a minute, like I'm really comfortable with one foot kind of like this, one foot like this. And then I stand up and I feel good.
Yep.
And I'm like, I do sumo wide. Like everything makes sense to me in this. And so if this is like where my body could sit the lowest, not that I'm loading it there, like the heaviest load, but a little bit higher than that. If my body makes sense there, then I started to kind of find that squat range, and it's imperfect. I literally have one foot pointed in a different way than the other. They're both slightly pointed out. But then I found like that kind of like, you go back to like these mistakes and people aiming for perfect form. I see that as being part of one of the mistakes is like your foot position. Actually, you should really explore internal or external rotation.
Yeah, for sure.
Some people can be probably a lot more sagittal.
And also with the sport of powerlifting too, like hips below the knees. And if you're hypermobile on your ankles, you might not hit depth because your knees are tracking so far forward. So to limit that, maybe you need to have more forward foot angle to reduce your ankle mobility so that your hips actually move lower. Right. So there's different like things like that. That's important to figure out too.
That was huge because then that actually helped me find my ankle mobility. But there are people who have hips. I couldn't do a narrow, again, it's similar to the sumo and conventional. I couldn't do a narrow stance squat, and I've seen people do this with a tremendous ankle mobility and just their hips move like that way, right? It's the way that your acetabular is actually sitting in there, like how it actually moves in there.
My mind won't do that. And so when I started to widen it out, I could get lower, and then I felt like a drive. And the second cue that you pointed out there was huge for me, which goes into 2 and 3, which is push the foot with a massive brace. Changed the game for me, because I felt like I was always getting into posterior chain, like using my back, and I always like cringe when I see some people, like, it looks like they're just, good morning it, right? They straighten their legs and they have barely had that bar move, right? And they're just not probably really driving those quads in that brace enough. So I found like the major thing that I've just really focused on for my own is how good of a brace and how much can I feel it in my quads by pushing my toes into I'm almost thinking of push my toes into my chest.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because that, like, put that midfoot to actually drive that chest up, because now I'm thinking of the chest and it made such a difference. So I think those cues have all been huge lessons.
I have one more thing, super important. This is a big tip for people listening. Watch yourself squat 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% and look at the speed of your eccentric. What happens is when people start lifting heavy, let's say 80, 90, 95, 100%, maybe even going for PR, you'll see them subconsciously doing it. They're going to slow down the eccentric phase of their squat, and that just ruins everything. You need to keep that pace consistent. If you squat 30% a certain way, if you squat 60% a certain way, why would it change just because the weight's heavier? I feel like part of it's people think, oh, if I go slower, I have a little bit more control of the lift. And also if I go slower, I can maybe time me hitting depth so I know when to go back up. But it's like, the slower you go into the hole, the slower you're going to get out of the hole. So you don't want to necessarily just dive bomb it. But if you look yourself do a body weight squat, it's very easy, down up, right? Squatting 50%, you go down up. But when people get to heavy weight, you'll see them squat slower, and that messes up their timing, and that messes up the lift in itself. So I would say, watch how you squat lighter weights, and make sure when you go for your 1 arm max is you squat it the same way. Like, the lift doesn't change just because the weight's heavier. You need it to stay the same.
I like that.
So don't change your eccentric speed.
Yeah, and this is a fault of mine for sure, 100% what I do. And I noticed it with Angelina. When she was doing crazy heavy lifts, like what I was seeing her do, and she would just drop into the bottom of squats. Oh, she just popped out. Yeah. But that's like, it's because you're creating the plyometric effect. Like, you're creating the stretch reflex. Yeah. And if you don't, you just go slow. It's different when you're on bench and you have a leg drive that comes out of it, that you kind of need to kind of set that. But even then, some guys balance, and you actually have to with the sport. You have to pause it. Yeah. But with this, it's like, if you can just tap it down, that's something I definitely have to put into, because you need the speed at the base. Yeah. So if you, instead of it being like the bench where you have to pause, if you don't need that pause, don't fucking pause. Yeah. Because you can have that much better of a stretch reflex. I think that's a really good tip. Yeah. Great advice for all of these things. I think a lot to learn from this, because you have so much great experience with this within coaching clients and stuff like that. And I learned a lot within this one. Do you currently do any social media or anything like that yourself?
So I have a social media, but if you check my Instagram, there's like next to no posts, but I do have a social media. So that's Kurtis.t. But I think sometimes I'll post my story about my athletes, or they'll maybe tag me and stuff, but I don't really do too many posts. I'm a coach that's kind of more on the down low, I guess. Like I said earlier before, I don't really technically advertise myself. I kind of like people to reach out to me if they were interested, because I know they're a little bit more serious in that sense. I gain the people that want to work with me. I don't try to work with people. Right. But I don't necessarily turn people down, but I just make sure people find me. I'm not trying to find them. I'm not cherry picking my athletes. I let them do the research, and if they want to have a conversation with me, I always have a conversation with them. Yeah. So
it's a good way to get the athletes that really care about it. I think that's a great way to do it. And I know from running social media, it's far less of a headache. Yeah. It's a good way. And also your reputation precedes you, which is a really good thing, right? Like the fact that you've had so many successful clients within, how many years have you coached now?
I would say I really picked into it in 2016.
Yeah.
So I was an athlete from 2012 to 2019, and then I was a coach from, I guess, 2016 to present. So.
Right. Yeah. So many years, many like clients that you've run through, a lot of that stuff. Simple gains. Oh, I did have a question on deloads.
Yeah.
Do you periodize deloads, or do you just kind of listen to the athletes?
So it's listen to the athlete. I think a big part of me as a coach is I have a plan, but I am probably the least formal in terms of plans.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to stray away from too much, but game day, if you were to ask me, hey, what are my attempts? I don't know. Your opener is going to be how your last warm-up looks. Your second attempt is going to be how your first looks. Your third attempt is going to be how your second looks. I don't necessarily like to force myself into this idea of how things should go or how things I want them to go or your goals. It's what you lift is going to be what you can lift that day. Whatever happens, happens. Your bench, we might be thinking your bench is really bad in training, and then all of a sudden it's extremely good in competition day, so we capitalize on that. And then we also need to, dial some off on your squats if need be. So in regards to that, in terms of deloads as a whole with someone's training, I'll kind of see, like, if I am programming things and I have an idea of how this lift should look for them and it's moving slower and the client tells me, hey, I'm feeling sore, I have this little bit of a tweak here that shouldn't maybe have come up. So that's when I realized, okay, now it's time for a deload. Yeah. I don't like to necessarily have structured deloads. If someone's going through their training and they're hitting PRs, and they're hitting PRs, and they're injury free and they have high energy and there's no issues, like, you don't necessarily need to deload that athlete because there's no signs of slowing down. So why would you slow them down if you don't need to?
Yeah.
But some athletes, they like to go hard, and maybe even go too hard. And then it's like, hey, buddy, like, let's take it back a week and let's start fresh in 2 weeks from now. Let's start building back up again. So I think it's deload per se is going to be client dependent. I have an idea of what the athlete's going to do for 4 weeks and a rough estimate, but outside of that, I don't. So it just kind of depends week to week, like how things are moving and what the client feedback is.
Right. No, and I like that, client feedback, and that's something I got so caught in. Jaden Wedler was like every 4 weeks to deload. And so I kind of did that, and I actually got bored with it because I'm like, I want to go. And so it's like, there's a sign there, like I can keep going. But what I kind of do is like, I'll still have a ramp up sequence. Yeah. And then I'll ramp down, but it's not a deload. It's just kind of
a temporarily lighter week.
Yeah, and it's almost just like recycling the intensity, for sure. Right? Almost like step loading to have the periodization like that. So when you're periodizing, because you're, like you say, you do 4 week blocks, and is that like still a steady progression even into the second set of 4 weeks?
Usually, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you just keep that kind of slowly climbing.
I don't like lifting heavy with my athletes. Usually when people look at my other athletes, like, they're like, hey, why are you lifting so light again? Why are you lifting so light? That looks easy. Like, for the most part, like, all my athletes are lifting between RPE 6 and 8. Like, nothing's necessarily hard for them. And then they'll hit PRs while it's on RPE 8, RPE 7, they're hitting PRs. So it's kind of nice in that sense. But yeah, generally everything typically ramps up. But there's going to be a time where you kind of need to see where they're at. So instead of me doing like 1 hour maxes, I'll usually do like a rep.
And ramp.
Yeah. So it's like, hey, we're going to just do 315 for as many reps as possible. Because I feel like that's a little bit less. It's a little bit more safe than just saying, hey, let's max out that lift. Because then I feel like you should save your max outs for a competition. It needs to have purpose. Like, you doing 1 set of 1, it tests your strength. And the purpose of training is we want to build your strength. If you're out there day after day testing your strength, you're not building anything. So I feel like with us doing an AMRAP, we're still building our strength by doing a challenging set. That's a big PR, muscle fatigue, we develop your technique, you hit a big PR, we're happy. And that's going to be a little bit more beneficial than a 1 hour max. Like, powerlifting is a bit weird in the sense that I feel like if you want to be the best powerlifter you can be, it's like you should do less like 1 hour maxes. Save your 1 hour maxes for the contest.
Absolutely.
So
yeah. Well, I mean, it's the test analogy is super valuable. I always try to explain to people, I'm like, if you wanted to learn a skill, or let's say you're studying in school,
you don't take an exam every fucking day. You don't take an exam even once a week. Like you practice a lot of it and you're tested. The exam just shows you how good your test was, right? So that one rep shows you how good all the other stuff is. And so many people are just so caught up in the PRs.
Yeah.
It's like your PRs are 3 to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 reps. Those are your PRs. And, even if you don't plan on doing a powerlifting meet, it's just not healthy and safe for you to do that more than I'm all about bro lifting. Once a year, you and your bros get together and see what you can do. But you're more likely going to hurt yourself if you're doing that more than once.
For sure. The potential for injury is so much higher.
Drastically.
And that is where we have to finish the conversation, unfortunately. So my phone ran out of batteries. I had 3 cameras going and my phone lasted the longest, but it only had, I think it was either storage of the battery up to an hour and 20. And so that's where we got to finish it. But I will tell you, because we kept chatting after, where we kind of continue the conversation and some valuable lessons that you can use for yourself. One was just around preventing injuries and recovery and just the mindset around how intensity will not serve you for that. So you can have 2 people that are going towards getting as strong as they can. One person goes as intense as they can, and then the other person is going nice, slow, and steady. Now, the person going really intense might even see strength gain sooner, but what they're probably almost guaranteed to see is more injuries, more nagging issues, more joint issues, and they're probably going to result in burnout. So they need to take time off. Now, the person doing simple sustainable gains where it feels like not even really that hard, they're just super consistent with it, will get way more time. You look at a year, the guy going really intense maybe has to take probably weeks off at a time. And if he gets injured, months off at a time. And the other guy really doesn't take much time off at all. He just might go a little bit lighter some weeks and slowly ramp up and go lighter again. And they continue that cycle. And that's where you see substantial gains over time. And as boring as it sounds, it's the simple sustainable gain system, right? And this is how I get my clients to work all the time. So they don't have to risk the injury in order to get the goal that they want. And the second one that was really helpful, and this goes back to the whole, training performance mindset, because you got to understand that it's all about movement patterns. It's all about coordinating the movement pattern and getting efficient at the movement pattern. And whether you're a powerlifter or whether you're just a guy or a girl in the gym trying to hit a 1 rep max, it's something that you really want to feel good about. Doing that 1 rep max and failing isn't anything to brag about. So he prepares people for powerlifting meets. And this is how he kind of put it, was he said that when his athletes go out there and he gets them, because he'll help choose their weights, he'll get them to you get 3 weights that you get to perform, basically. So Quinn had done the bench press. He did 3 different weights that he knew he could perform very well at. And they increase in weight each time. And whatever the most total that you can get out of that is your performance. And he said, I want an athlete to come to me and say, oh man, that felt easy. I felt like I could have done more. Good. That is way better than you failing in your performance, because no one cares about the weight that you didn't lift. And that's a beautiful quote. And even if you're not powerlifting, I guarantee if you're someone who likes the barbell, you failed on the bench press or the back squat or something at some point in time. And then you also have it in your head to brag about that story, because I used to as well. But why? Why are we bragging about something you couldn't do? Oh yeah, I almost had 225 that one day, but did you? Oh, you didn't. So then why are you so pumped about it? I would be way more pumped about, yeah, I actually did 205 the other day and it was really easy. Can you do 225? I don't know. It's not in my program. It's just make the heavy weights feel easy by doing the simple sustainable game approach. You got to remember it's a movement pattern. You got to remember it's coordinating weight. A golfer is not going to get better at his golf swing by gripping and ripping it all the time. You can see how much coordination that takes to hit that small golf ball just in the center of the club, for it to spin or not spin in the right way that you want. Because if you're off by a millimeter, you're off by a mile down the course. And guess what? If you're off by a millimeter on your barbell, that could be miles of danger for your spine if it's on your back. So it's a coordination pattern first and foremost with the heaviest force that you can sustain. So if you look at it with that approach, it really can change the way that you want to go into these things with just the right intensity. I know there's people all over the map. There's people who will go really intense in things, and some people who don't really push hard enough. But from what I've seen, the people that I know that are anything like me, is that you want to go intense, but go just intense enough. right? So that you know you're doing the movement well, and track those reps each week. I personally encourage you to do wave cycling. So you go higher reps earlier in the month, heavier reps later in the month, and then repeat that the next month. Go back into those lighter reps, but just be a bit stronger. Just be a bit stronger. If you're in November, be a bit stronger in December, be a bit stronger. And this is the way that we discussed it. If you put, say, 5 pounds on your upper body lifts, doing that wave system, that could be 60 pounds a year. And then if you put 10 pounds on all your lower body lifts, it's 120 pounds a year. And it's not going to work perfectly like that, but if it's even close to that, you're making substantial gains over years. So I hope you learned a lot from this. And if you take it serious, reach out to Kurtis. I know I plan to in the future. Kurtis says if people reach out to him, he will possibly work with them if their intention's right, if they're very serious about it. He does it in his spare time. And so I know I'm going to reach out to him because I think he has amazing stuff and he really knows this stuff very well. Even if you don't reach out to him, I mean, you can check out my stuff. I have stuff on YouTube, how to do a lot of different exercises very well. And it's a free exercise library, by the way, the exact same one that I give my clients. You can go on there and I try to describe them very well for you to do it with good form. But I will say, get help. If there's one mistake I made early in my career, anyone asked, do you have any regrets? And I don't like to color it a regret, but a lesson that I wish I had was I wish I let people teach me more. I wish I didn't go in with the idea that I could figure it out. I needed to be led way more, and I could save way more time, way more injuries, because I had the hustle, I had the effort. I just didn't know where to put it. And I know I could be way stronger if I would have had that. But that's a mistake that some people tend to make, and hopefully you can get guidance. And if you can't afford a program, always just go to someone you know that lifts and lift with them. Say, hey, can I go to the gym with you once in a while? You show me something about this deadlift and back squat stuff, just for that little extra support. It can go a long way, and it'll help you with accountability as well. And I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy it. So I hope you learned a lot today. There's a lot to take in when it comes to the powerlifting. So if you know anyone that likes powerlifting, it would mean a ton if you could share this with them, because I'm willing to bet they're going to really appreciate it. And I know I'll appreciate it. Please like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast a ton. And just thank you for continuing to listen. I always appreciate anyone who can spend this kind of time just listen to me and my people rant about stuff that we like. I hope it helps you. I hope it helps you continue to chase your passion, because that's what I want to do for you. Because life is not about the pursuit of happiness, but the happiness within your pursuit. I'll catch you next time, my friend.